Oh, found an easier way to go.
Dude, I even got dressed up for you.
I was impressed. Thank you.
Hi, Roger. There it goes again. Poor phone. Look. You hear that, did you? So how you doing? Hey, Saul, you ready?
Okay, Colin.
How you doing? Good? Okay. I don't know. Are we ready? Aloha mai kako. Here we go. I guess we got the thumbs up here, so let's just go with it. Aloha, everyone. Vo Meliana Aluli Meyer Kia. He Kikyo Kia Nane. I am very privileged this afternoon, this evening, to have a conversation with a beloved friend. And as I'm introducing him, I want you to know that you can read about all of his, as we say, street cred, his bio, etc. But most importantly, you need to know that he's a friend. Solomon, aloha to you. We're so happy to have this time to be with you. I've known you for a very long time, you know, half your life anyway, almost. And I can say, young man, that it's not only a privilege, but people need to know that, you know, as another artist speaking to our community of creatives, to know you and to believe in your work and to understand the facility within which you work is just really a privilege for anybody to know you in that regard. So I just want to take a moment and just let folks know, if you don't know, Solomon is possibly one of the most engaging, extraordinary futurists in not only our community of artists, but in the Hawaiian community. So his voice tonight, as he speaks about Polyfantastica, is not only aspirational to me, but possibly, most importantly, not only a visionary voice, but a voice that portends cautionary tales. So as we jump into the story, let me just tell you, he's not only an artist, he's an exquisite artist. Not only is he an illustrator, but he's the best we have in our community. And as an artist, my whole life, I can just say, not only kudos to him, but I've had the privilege of working with him on mural projects and other things. And he is a leader, and he is an inspiration to all of us who work with him in community. He is an activist in terms of understanding deep Ike Hawaii, and he is also a shapeshifter, as he can do many different things. But you know, as a creative, you have to know, everyone out there, that it's a privilege for us to share that our language is a language of visuals and not necessarily of words. So tonight, I really introduce with great joy, Solomon, and gratitude for just giving me the chance to work with you and be with you again. Good to see you, brother.
Oh, wow. Boy, my goodness, Meliana. Oh, I really have to lay the foundation, which is, I'm just pula pula. I'm just a little new shoot coming up out of the ground, and the tilth, the health of the soil really is it's because of good soil management that our kupuna, that our leaders, our alaka'i, like Meliana, has, the work that they've done allows for, abundance, just abundance in every sense. And, it's, I feel like I'm the tip of a spear, just a very singular point, but I feel the weight of that momentum behind me. And it's, really, it's that long enduring effort that Meliana has been putting into the community. But yeah, Kalamai, I really have to, I'm a mirror to reflect back all to you and communities you represent, Meliana, and we are all part of it.
It's a kako, isn't it? Isn't it a kako? We've worked with so many extraordinary people, Solomon. So mahalo for your kindness. I just want to ask, in terms of this Polyfantastica, if we can just jump right in.
Sure.
I want to know, I have so many questions, and I can totally understand your enthusiasm for all of your work, because you want to tell us everything. So if we think about Polyfantastica as a graphic novel, it's so much more than that. It's kind of like a mindset. Mm-hmm. So folks who don't know about Polyfantastica, can you, it began with this simple question, and the question that you asked in your work and have answered is, what would have happened if Hawaii was never interrupted? And I find that such a profound question, because it is played out, it is drawn out in your art. Is that still the question that Polyfantastica wants to answer? Or, as you say, there's a parallel universe developing here? Please, just could you address the beginnings of Polyfantastica, and we can just take it as a progression. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I believe I can share my screen when you guys are ready for me. I'm going to do that just so that we can get the art up on the wall, because normally what happens, like I'm already doing it right now as we speak, I'm talking when I should be showing art. So awesome. Let me do that right now. Let me front load the art. Oh, let's see. Okay, well, when I get the thumbs up from everybody, they'll let me share my screen. So let me see. Okay, share screen. Are we ready?
Come in.
Okay. Oh, it says disabled. Oh,
co-host, you're ready.
Oh, okay. So sorry. Here we go. Okay, so this is me, and I believe this is my screen. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, okie dokie. So still figuring this stuff out. Here we go. Oh, and we're cutting ahead just a little bit. There we go. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so Polyfantastica started out with a simple question: what would happen if Hawaii was never interrupted? Now that question has evolved, and it really is what would happen if all of our elder cultures, all of our native cultures, all of our indigenous cultures were left to thrive. And it's really just a what if that grew out of, that's the favorite sound I used to make as a kid growing up. My mom and dad would always say, that was your favorite word. What if, what if, what if, what if? And now what it became is, and then what? And then what happened? And then what happened? And so the word Polyfantastica, originally it was Polynesian centric because, being part Hawaiian, part Japanese, Chinese, Russian, Polish, German, Portuguese, all of this mixed together was really kind of like, I wanted to tell traditional values from Hawaii and spread them around the world, and I wanted to use an allegory, visual allegory was a 40,000 year timeline beginning from a point where a native people woke up. There were no sails on the horizon. There was no foreigner, nobody showing up to tell them to do anything differently, nobody bringing disease, nobody bringing any of those sort of things. And instead, people went and got along with it. To me, that's a really powerful and healing message. And I honestly want everybody to come up with their own Polyfantastica. And so at the very beginning, as it happened, Polyfantastica began, the first foundation were 40 of these millennial figures. So each one of these figures, I came up with them, they represent the most important archetype or the most important figure every 1,000 years. So I said, if I make 40 of them, then if I can, from these figures, you can infer 40,000 years. It's as if, look at our own history. What would be the most important figure from the year 2000 to 1 to 2000? So you might have maybe a prophet, and then you would have an astronaut, and then you would have, well, what's next? What is the most important figure 1,000 years from now? And then what? And then what? And then what? And then what? And what I began to do as I began to flesh this out, I'm going to move to the next image. Okay. We've jumped ahead. I think the previous two images were the year 7 and 8 millennium. This is now the 15th and 16th millennium. So human beings have actually transcended everything that we understand as right and wrong, good and evil. All of that is like, there's a whole new categories and ways of thinking about what it means to be kind, what it means to be evil, what it means to be good, and all these different sort of things. And it really makes me feel like we are just on the, we are such an adolescent species, like we're still in the womb. We're still gestating as a species. We have all these amazing forms yet to transform into. And, effectively, Polyfantastica is sort of like, what J.R.R. Tolkien did. By the way, I grew up reading the Silmarillion at night and then going with my dad guys into the mountain and farming taro and talking about Kalo culture during the day. And by the way, Silmarillion is Tolkien's creation myth. It's how he told the story of how the Hobbit and Gandalf and all these other characters came to be from a Finnish mythologies based upon Scandinavian mythologies. And I said, oh, I'm going to borrow that. But instead of using words, I'm going to map this out visually. So I created basically 40 of these images, and each one of these images, again, represented 1,000 years and then 1,000 years later. And as it happened, what you're seeing, this series of 40 images, 40 figures, I actually started it during a stay that I had opportunity to stay over at the John Charlot house in Kahala area. Like it just so happened I could stay a few days there, or actually about a week there, and I was working in his studio, and I laid all these out, and I had actually started working on them there. So strange beginnings for things. But of course, Charlot has always been influenced. I've always been influenced by his sense of form and design. But really, it's a fusion of Hawaiianness and outsideness. And that's kind of where a lot of my designs really come from, a place of trying to bridge, the kinds of things that I grew up, science fiction that I grew up with Hawaiian culture. Tolkien meets Hawaiian culture. Frank Herbert meets Hawaiian culture. Isaac Asimov meets Hawaiian culture. So, and then of course later it began to be indigenous science fiction more than just Hawaiian science fiction. To really open it up to say that everybody is part of this narrative, this indigenous narrative of kind of like rebooting what it means to be human. So that's kind of like the first of my 4 parts, and I've probably gone way over on the time I wanted to allocate. But this was the beginnings of Polyfantastica. It started with 40 figures, and each figure representing 1,000 years.
Well, something, if you think about it, my dear, obviously 40 is a full ka'au, so it's not an accident that you're coming up with the number 40 either. So that brings me to want to ask you, in terms of your work, about the detail of your work, because it's really important for people to know that the kind of exquisite forms and frightening and futuristic forms that come from your work, are not things that any old buddy is creating. I find your work so masterful and insightful. Maybe you could share with folks about this notion of a full ka'au, or possibly the reason that Ike Hawaii is so important to you. I know the future is important to you, but what is the ground of your vision?
Sure.
It would be really nice for people to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm gonna jump ahead to this slide real briefly. I know this is probably not the best image. It may not be coming through as clearly as I'd like it to, but basically, the idea of 40,000 came from this sense of number 4, 4s and 8s being such an important part of our culture, and within these four different parts. What I wanted to try to do was think about dedicating them or evolving them around our 4 major gods within the Hawaiian pantheon, with being Ku, Lono, Kanaloa, and Kane. And so what we're seeing here is these are 400 centennial images. If I were to zoom in on one of these, they'd be a fully detailed drawing. All of these images represent 100 years. So effectively, I would take 10 of these images and I would slip them in between the millennial figures. So there would be 1 millennial figure, 10 centennial vignettes. So that's what we're seeing are vignettes. So I basically created 100 vignettes for each of the 4 epochs. The first epoch dedicated to Ku, the second epoch dedicated to Lono, the third epoch dedicated to Kanaloa, and the 4th epoch dedicated to Kane. And this all has to do with the expansion of consciousness. So within the first epoch, we have a world that, although we were not impacted by colonization, we still had to deal with profound conundrums that we were already facing. Hawaiians were already engaging in warfare, and indigenous peoples were already engaging in warfare before colonists arrived. So we were already working on that problem, right? The fact that we weren't always sharing what we needed to share peacefully. Yeah. So if nobody came to interrupt us, we would keep working on how to create a world where warfare is obsolete, and that people do not need to be constantly afraid that some raiders are going to come sweep in and take all of our resources and take all of our money or whatever. So in 40,000 years, you have 1/2 of a planet dedicated towards Ku. And Ku is not only a god of war, but he's also a god of resistance. And that also becomes in the form of peaceful resistance. Resistance, a forest is a form of resistance. And that's why Ku is also related to forests. And so in 10,000 years, 1/2 of a planet actually comes into an age of peace. The other half is still at war. So it's almost like one half of a planet becomes connected. The other half is still yet unconnected.
Mhm.
In the age of Lono, 10,000 years later, so in our another batch of 10 or 100 of these centennial image is the time of Lono. In the time of Lono, you have all of one planet, which I call Honua, which is a parallel Earth or a sister Earth. Yeah. In this sister Earth, you have one whole planet. In the time of Lono is now at peace. I mean, and honestly, there's no science fiction weirder than talking about worlds at peace. And yet, how often do we spend time talking about, oh, by the way, when do we want justice? When do we want it? Now. Okay, great. What does that look like tomorrow? What does that look like 100 years from now? What does peace look like? And then what? And then what happened? And then what happened? Peace is just a temporary thing if we fall back into war again, right? And there never really was peace. It was just war delayed. War eventually falls away like our tails did. Yeah. We eventually lose war. It transforms into ideas. It transforms into stories, and it lives on in stories that people tell their children that humans used to kill each other. And be like, what? In a world where there's all these mysteries to be solved, all these magical things. So I'm going to segue right into the next pick, and I apologize, everyone. I already see all of Polyfantastica in my head, so I forget that you guys cannot. So I apologize.
Were those images handsome? Because there's so many extraordinary.
Oh yeah. So we're gonna zoom in on one of them, or an example of one of them in just a bit. But I'm gonna jump ahead right around the time when that was still being developed. Because when you sit down to draw 400 things, that takes about 10, 15 years. So that's basically what I was doing. And while I was doing that, I got contacted by the Honolulu Advertiser. And in about 2007, they wanted to run Polyfantastica as a serial in the Advertiser before it became, well, before everything happened with media, with how news is being used and distributed around the world. So they wanted to publish it as, but starting in the coup era, starting from year 1 out of 40,000. So in year 1, there are no ships that arrive. Instead, there's all these internal, kind of a Game of Thrones, but Pacific style, with just a little bit of magic thrown in there, a little bit of dragons, whatever. But basically, it's a heavily political kind of a situation where these warring factions are going off at each other, and so these are some of the pages from the comic strip. I grew up on Heavy Metal magazine. I didn't waste my time with DC Comics. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. No, really. I didn't waste my time with DC Comics or Marvel or any of that stuff. I was like, why would I do that when I can go straight to the hard stuff? And Heavy Metal magazine, yeah, it was, tremendous amount of sexism. It was tremendous. It was for dudes in the late 70s, early 80s, which is, it was a thing of its time, which I don't like to say because I think that I don't want to excuse it. But it had amazing art. Richard Corbin, and of course, Frank Frazetta, and of course, Mobius. There's some great European and not American necessarily artists, just, I think that was really important for me. And so I drew my inspirations from, actually in this scene, what we're looking at right now, we're having these two factions that are at war. Mm-hmm. And one of these factions has called upon these sorcerers who are riding on the heads of eels. And as the sorcerer is standing on the head of an eel, he's raising his hand and he's crushing it. And a giant tidal wave hand raises up out of the ocean to crush an entire fleet of canoes. And it's like, I mean, this stuff came out obviously about 10 years before Game of Thrones or any of that stuff. But to me, it made total sense to have these, a pseudo or parallel Pacific where canoe technologies eventually evolve, where canoes are giant like aircraft carriers, and there's these whole armies made out of shapeshifters that'll like run and dive into the water, and and they'll be like scouts, and all these different kinds of things that they can become. And so, but this was year 1 of a 40,000 year timeline, and that's kind of, and right towards the end of this is when I began to return to my 40,000 year timeline, so basically fleshing them out. So we remember this image, and then I'm going to jump over. So if we zoom in on this image, what we see are images like this, and they're basically some of them are enhanced thumbnails, some of them are actually really well rendered. each one of these I was working on concurrently with the Polyfantastica comic that you just saw. And by the way, that comic was then put together and it was submitted to the Queensland Triennial of Asia Pacific Arts back in 2011, I think. So anyway, so while that was all happening, I really wanted to focus on my 40,000 year timeline. So one of these images, I basically do one of these to highlight the most important event every century. And then as the viewer looks at the next page, it's like, and then this is the most important event. And each one of these images comes with a simple title. Like I think the title for this one might be like the decipherers of the blue starlight or something. Like I'll just put an image and a title and I'll move on. Image, title, move on. 100 years later, 100 years later. So it'd be like year 36,742. And the next one would be year 36,815. It would be, I just grab these random dates, but at the end, I would have 40,000 years of time. And to me, that was enough because now I can dive into this timeline like it's a giant spinal column. I can now go in and plug in whenever I want to, and I get to watch my own Netflix. I get to watch my own Star Wars. I get to watch my own series, and I'm going to sound completely aloof and selfish, but I'm like so completely interested in this that I really don't have time to watch anything else. It's like, I just turn my eyeballs backwards and watch what's on my brain. Like, wow, I want everybody to tap into this. And that's why, in a way, Polyfantastica has been a slow motion pitch. And I'll get to where I would love for Polyfantastica to go in the future. I mean, in this conversation in a little bit. But I wanted to share that, all of these individual timelines are broken into these vignettes, which, and here's another one. I think we've jumped ahead to the 38th millennium. So not 1,000 years from now, not 2,000 years from now, no, 34,000 years, 35,000 years. Again, and working on this project, just putting an image and then having it put chronologically. And as I turn the pages, I'm reformatting my brain. I'm beginning to see rising and falls of empire. I begin to see the good guys. It's only so long before the good guys become the bad guys. And then the bad guys, it's only so long for them before they become the good guys. And it's like, when we start thinking about things in 1,000-year terms, then I think we're thinking on the level that our kahuna and our priests, our sages, when they're thinking about things in those terms, the story is radical. I created Polyfantastica because I couldn't find it anywhere else. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find anywhere else that, where they had done something like this. So, but I'm going to end my talk here, and this part of it here, because this is kind of like the end of the second part of Polyfantastica.
Okay, then I really want you to speak to folks so that they understand that, this notion of prescience, as in seeing future. People don't really understand the function of an artist. And I really want folks not only to understand the story of Polyfantastica, but more about you as an artist, as a visionary, because visionaries foretell the future. And you were speaking about pandemics, way back in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's a foreboding in a way that this pandemic is kind of being realized through your work in a strange way. And people could be a little bit frightened about it. But I want you to kind of speak to this kuleana and responsibility then of speaking to the future. Do you feel your images are speaking to the future, invoking the future, paralleling the future? Because you spoke about this years ago, by the way, my dear. So you could help folks understand that tie, or the bridge of Polyfantastica to today. Sure. I'd appreciate that. Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. So originally, Polyfantastica, when it was a little bit more Polynesian centric, it really began with Europeans having, in a parallel Earth, a sister Earth, they're decimated. So we actually have this mass pandemic that wipes out most of the world's surface. And Hawaii, because it was so isolated, becomes the predominant, just by default, because there's nobody else here. So the human race has to re-begin, but from the Pacific. And it becomes a Pacific-centric world. It would be technology as if, our ancestors, we began to then dictate what technology is, and then to kind of dictate technologies that get moved into the future. And even towards, even before the pandemic, I was kind of evolving this narrative to be like, there's definitely in this world that I'm working on, there was definitely some sort of pandemic. So there were some ships that would arrive in the Pacific, and some of the major cultures in this world were decimated. But but not all indigenous peoples on Earth were set back. So you did have some other kingdoms or other societies left to live on. And so I really wanted to move the shift away from just Hawaiians repopulating the Earth to it being closer to be a little bit of all indigenous cultures are left to repropagate the Earth. Having survived some of these biological, some of the impacts of biology, but we don't really see the but right on that note, I'm gonna jump right into a couple more images here. This image here is another series that I did much more recently. Now, maybe about 2 years ago. One thing we'll know is that because I've been working on this work for about 16 some odd years, I've evolved. You can see the progression of me as an artist evolve. Sit down and draw 400 anythings. You will develop a style. 400 drawings will change you. And so this is a character from the first year in Polyfantastica. I basically redid the archetype. So now I did 40 of these figures, but they're not in color, they're just in pencil. But they're millennial figures. It's like a redux of the millennial figure idea. So I created one of these figures for every 1,000 years. This is a priest, this is a war priest from the first millennium, from the first 100 years, in fact. And basically, it's a time when we actually have major wars that are going on in this parallel Pacific. One of the things I kind of wanted to be really important about this is that I don't want to over-romanticize Hawaiian or any indigenous cultures. All people do stupid things, but our capacity for destruction is now exponential. As soon as we have, nuclear warheads that could end all life on Earth, we're talking about new calibers of stupidity, of unbelievable and kind of unacceptable. And so basically I use these images to plot points on a chronological map that says, this is reasons why we make sacrifices in our lifetime, because the future deserves. It's almost like future worship. It's almost like these other times yet to happen deserve the right to exist, deserve the right to. And there's a tiny little mantra, and it kind of came from this, is that how much do we love our grandchildren and their grandchildren and their grandchildren and their great 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 great. And so this, I can basically run that track like for about a couple hours of just saying like, and then I realized I'm going to shoot my love out into time and space in every direction, into the past and into the future, as far as I can imagine it. Wow, I just feel great. I feel like, ooh, my love is everywhere, right? I'm all throughout space and time and all through all dimensions. I may not be the person that solves the mysteries of Neptune, but my love is going to be part of that. It's going to be one Lego block on top of this pillar of, that gets us there. And so, basically mapping how we evolved away from warfare and how we learned to talk to planets. And this is what's really important. We ask the universe, can we enter? Just like our kupuna asked before we enter into a space. So it is an indigenous perspective on we should never colonize anything ever again. Right? We rethink this idea of instead of fighting with the mystery, we're dancing with the mystery. And I think that's an important distinction. This image here that I'm showing, I also did a series of artifacts. I created one artifact for every 1,000 years. The 40,000 year timeline, the 40 archetypes that I just showed, and the 40 artifacts, they're all available as PDF downloads on my website. So this is, this is kind of a shameless plug, but it is what it is. This is why, but I don't really, if you really like it, you guys have my complete permission to copy the PDF and share it. So to steal this book, wasn't that a thing from the the 70s or 60s? But it's basically take it, because I want everybody to plant their own Polyfantastica. And I'll go a little bit more, if I have enough time, I'll go into what the future of it is. But I'm gonna jump right into the next image. This is where Polyfantastica is now. And the future part is I'm gonna jump on it. But right now, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just jump on social media, and I'm gonna use it as an open drawing board, an open sketchbook. I'm gonna actually continue to share little pieces. I'm gonna jump around in my 40,000 year timeline. I'm gonna be in a deep space in 1 week, 1 day, and the next day I'm gonna be back home, on these islands. I'm gonna be all over. I'm gonna jump over this timeline wherever I feel most interested in. That's where I'm gonna visit in this 40,000 year timeline. Here we have a navigator at a time when humans beings are dreaming themselves across the stars. Pele dreamed herself from Hawaii Island to Kauai. So I was just saying, if we can dream from island to island, then we can dream from stars to stars.
Star to star. Fabulous.
Perfect segue, right? For me, I was like, oh, that makes complete sense. And so now I basically I'm self-publishing a free zine, basically a coffee table book, of images. Every day I come up with like about a couple paragraphs of text just to contextualize it. I'll say, oh, this series, I'll do I do a series of 4s. So every day I'll post a new image on my social media. So that's at Solomon Enos. I'll post a new image, and it'll be what was I just doing? The city seeds. I just finished the series today. I just posted it about a couple hours before we got on. And it's seeds that are planted into the ground that turn into cities. I have an example of it. Right? I'll just showing it in just a little bit.
Super.
And so this is another image of human beings creating these instruments that when they play it, it turns the entire planet into an instrument. And the planet starts to make sound that resonates. And all the other planets in that star system turn into instruments. They start making these sounds and noises. And eventually, whole star systems begin to reorganize themselves. And it's all part of awakening this great galactic consciousness, which eventually, when the galaxy reconfigures itself, it's in the shape of this giant woman. And as she sings, all the other galaxies will awaken. And that'll just be the beginning. Because then there's like pan-galactic forms, anyway, it goes on and on and on. And then what? And then what happened? And that's all, as you can see, it becomes Polyfantastica. It becomes stories without end.
I have a question for you, young man.
Oh, great. And I've gone way over time, I bet.
No, it's okay. I just want to let you know that I'm sure there are people who have questions, but you are your own category. You realize that. Oh. So these images, these mo'olelo, these ka'au, they are so ferocious in aloha and in the possibilities of healing and wellness. Is that your wish? I mean, and of course it is, but I mean, as artists, how else are we supposed to let people know how we feel? When I looked at this image that you have now, to me, it's like, I mean, where does this come from in your mind? I know people want to know that because, people have read about you, in these different formats, but your imagery is so rich. You really are in a category all your own, my dear. So could you actually speak to the notion of being in Hawaii? What difference does that make? And how do you feel directed to help others not only through your images, but through the molelo that they tell.
Sure.
Yeah, could you?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
please.
Absolutely. Real quickly, I had a chance to travel to South America as part of an American Friends Service Committee delegation. So I was part of a Quaker, or Quaker group, and we went and we traveled into these communities, and I just looked around and I saw these barrios without end, and I listened to the Afro-Indigenous communities that we visited, and they said, as soon as you pick up a gun for your cause, you've lost it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between dying for what you believe in and killing for what you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And they would talk about the cosmic plan for our species. They were talking about not just about their children, not just about the fact that the paramilitary, the drug cartels, the government, the U.S. government, the guerrillas. I mean, they were being hit by all these different sides. And they said, you know what? We're going to create the Guardia Indígena. And they have these staffs, and they'll stand and they'll say, you can kill us, but we will not fight back. But you're going to have to kill all of us. Because if we help you guys, then your enemies are going to come in and kill our children. It's like, I visited these places. I came back to Hawaii and said, guys, we're going to be okay. We're going to be all right. Hawaii's going to be all right. We're in a bit of an ivory castle or ivory tower, and it's like, in a way, we're going to be okay. We got to get well now. We are the voice out of the blue. We can bring healing to places where nobody else is going to get let in, because they got history, got baggage with that group, got baggage with that group, got baggage with that tribe, got baggage with that facet, or faction. But nobody's got baggage with us. So we really have, and so a story coming from Hawaii, a story coming from the Pacific that talks about a complete deviation for the human narrative, almost like Polyfantastica, is really a kind of a prophecy. Okay. And it talks about a story about how humans did it. How not just, and they did it, first of all, by getting out of their own light. The story is not about humans. It's not a human story. So, we're dancing with a mystery. We're not dancing with ourselves only. Yeah. And so that's something that really kind of grew out of this idea of, and just real quickly, something that just came to me recently, a memory from Uncle Eddie, Ka'anana. Years of one of our elders, he would hold my hand and talk and just be quiet. Well, before he talked, he'd be quiet, like something I could definitely use more of. And he'd be quiet for like a minute, and then he would tell me something. And one of the things he told me once was that if you're given a gift and you don't share it, it'll make you sick. So, here, go, take them, free. So I'm trying to give my art away as quickly as possible in as many different ways as possible, like a native plant would give away seeds. Yeah. And one of the most important trends in Polyfantastica is the fact that we then blow across the cosmos like seeds, like spores. We come from Haloa, we come from the taro plant. We return to Haloa. We recycle our own oxygen. We live off of sunlight. We turn green, basically, which is a nice neutral color. We're basically colorless if we're green, right? We're all green. It can be relatively easy being green. So I think that's where Polyfantastica is just basically trying to create a whole new set of tools, a whole new vocabulary for what peace can look like. I could defindefinitely go on and on, but I'm trying to end it right there. At least this thought.
Well, I'm going to actually ask you, because archetypes are really critical to our mythologies, to our narratives, and so as a visual storyteller, what would you want to share with the young? Your extraordinary children. What are you hoping that, if they were going to get little pearls from you or seeds from you, what are you hoping, one or two ideas? Because when you speak, my dear friend, your ideas are so expansive and they are so far reaching. It's really hard to hold on to one or two things outside of this extraordinary notion of peace and love, which is everything. But as a storyteller, as a mythologist, as somebody who's created your own narrative for the world, where do you want us to settle?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is 2021. I'd love to. Yeah.
Perfect. And perfect. This is right where Polyfantastica is right now. And this is kind of like, I just worked on these next set of pieces
Okay.
about 4 days ago. So this is fresh. This is some of the freshest stuff that I got right now. And it's informed by everything that's happened before. I would like to pass on a really, I think a real simple message is that in all the universe that we know about right now, I think kindness is weird. It's strange. It's somebody basically acting in a way that is benevolent to other people is a strange phenomenon, and it should be honored and revered and practiced. And it is painful. The universe is a violent place. Quasars are violent, right? It's not a very hospitable. So the universe looks at us and says, look at that. Kindness is the opposite of entropy, right? I think that's my hypothesis, right? So we're actually creating life. Life is the opposite of entropy, right? So we're creating as opposed to destroying things. And to me, that's actually so when we get a chance to be compassionate, we get a chance to be kind to ourselves, to others, to our to our environment, to our shared story. It's nothing less than magic. There's nothing less than as if I had a nebula floating in my hand right now. That would be less cool than me being nice. You know what I mean? So I think that to me is like, that's the most mind-blowing part, right? And the fact that we can solve, conversely, all of these crazy problems, we can solve flying around the world, we can solve, well, not anymore probably, but talking around the world, we can solve all these different things, but we don't know how to be nice to ourselves, to each other, and to our world, then I don't accept that. We're currently on our heads. Polyfantastica is just kind of a reminder that, oh, actually, we can stand up. We don't need to be standing on our heads for the past, 10,000 years. So, but with this last few series, and I know we're coming right towards the end, here we see a planting of a city seed. This man plants it into the ground. I do a lot of these anthropomorphic faces. They just sort of show up all the time. And then that city seed then eventually grows to a house. And then as this house grows forward, it crawls forward and it leaves a forest behind. And this is a moon on a distant planet, on a distant star system that is asked, that is called for life to enter, to come. And so we're responding. So instead of us imposing life, it is being welcomed forward. And so because we learn to talk story with planets, like we learn to talk story with our islands, we learn to talk story, with our stones, with our trees, and all these things are, talking story to stones isn't weird. Sitting down and watching television for 16 hours straight, that's weird, right? Talking to trees, that's not weird at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. Hey, listen, let's ask these guys out there, the folks that are on, if they have any questions, because this is a great opportunity to speak to you, my dear. And as you continue, because we have about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have some good time. So if anyone wants to, please put your idea or thought in the chat, or maybe Roger, I'm not sure how you want that to work, but as you finish your mo'olelo, we'll see if we can get a few questions in too.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
awesome. Yeah. So a real quick last thought. So this city has turned into a seed has turned into a forest, and eventually it grows to like the size of an entire mountain, and it's just growing up out of the ground and up into the heavens, and it's getting ready to launch another seed out into the cosmos again. And what I'm not showing here, what's invisible, is the same thing that's invisible in the islands here. I mean, but we can make it visible. Our ancestors didn't build giant pyramids, but what they did was they built these amazing and intricate connections between humans and between the land. So our great works are great relationships. Yeah. We don't have but the thing is, those great relationships, they're not as permanent as the pyramids are, right? But at the same time, they're not as hard to rebuild either, right? So we can rebuild these connections tomorrow. We don't need to hire, we don't need to indenture, half of our population over 60 years to rebuild. Well, But it probably feels like it. Probably would be easier to build a pyramid than to do a lot of the social, so a lot of the work in the communities that needs to be done. It's probably as hard as building a pyramid. But anyway, the point is that there's a lot of allegory in these stories. This is basically activist escapism or escapist activism. Like we need to be passionate about the things that we're passionate about, but we got to survive ourselves. We have to survive our passion. And creating these amazing, these visions of hopeful futures of being like, this is why we're struggling every day. Because once we get peace started, peace without end for everyone, everywhere, always, then that becomes potentially a cycle that will sustain itself. But we got to get there. And I think we can't get there if we don't even have an image to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We can't put a puzzle together if we don't have a box cover. So we need images. So these are basically railroad tracks that are just laid out, or a pathway that's laid out, and it's just waiting to be filled in. So right before the last 15 seconds is what Polyfantastica really wants to be is a macro collaboration project. This is a soft pitch to the world, basically. This is the reason why I'm like, don't bother downloading Polyfantastica. If you want to, you can, but you'll stumble across it for free sometime or whatever. I want it to slowly get out, because it may not be for this generation, and that's okay. Because I'm having so much fun with it already. But I would love one day for someone to come along who wants to underwrite this kind of a project to say, I would love for 400 artists and 400 writers to each finish. What I did was I created 400 book covers. Mm-hmm. And I got all of this from Waianae Library growing up as a little kid. When I wasn't up in the mountains, I was borrowing Lord of the Rings, and I was reading about the Bene Gesserit in the Dune series. And I was like, oh, this is I can see the fusion of Hawaiian culture with a lot of these different things. And we can talk about Hawaiian culture using allegory. Mm-hmm. And that becomes a broader. So that's my soft pitch to the world. We'll see what happens. And if nothing comes of it, I'm having a lot of fun. Now I'm going to be quiet.
No, actually, not at all, my dear. The point is, unless we speak our aspirations and our hopes, nothing really can be realized other than what is absolute, what is real. So the fact that you have this extraordinary gift, Saul, of being able to help all of us along in these amazing ways, this notion of having 400, a macro collaboration, 400 other artists as well, and writers and filmmakers and other futurists is really so ambitious. And it takes somebody like you to put these book covers end to end together to allow us even the possibility of thinking. But I can tell you, it's challenging, because what you give us, Salamangelo, as I've always called you, is so much to think about, and it's actually intimidating. So I want you to know that as another artist, I'm humbled by your visions, because we want to participate, a lot of people, but we don't. You've got the book covers, the front and the end, but maybe it's, and I appreciate that you have these other additional pieces, but I'm going to challenge you, because there's so many who would possibly want to participate, but it's difficult to figure out how to enter.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure, my dear friend, because these are so prodigious. And so you mentioned artifact before, and you mentioned, objects and things. And you've shown us some of those, so maybe that's another way in. And do you think maybe through your mural work, it also is an interface for this kind of work, or is that a totally different category of outreach? What do you think about that?
In Polyfantastica, people go outside and paint their walls all the time. So one of the things, basically in this world, I get to kind of create these completely idealized situations where in Polyfantastica, everybody is their own artist. So
Okay.
art, there is no art class, but instead art is a part of every discipline. So so basically, Polyfantastica, everybody should do world building, basically. World growing, actually, I think it's just a better word.
Yeah.
So I would invite anyone to do this, do a test, come up with a list of the most important figures in human history every 1,000 years. You got 40,000 years, you're gonna have to go back, do some prehistory stuff, or just make it up. And so by doing that, it causes us to ask strategic questions about what is the most important values that we see in humanity and in humanity. And I think what I really would love for people to do is to find their own Polyfantastica. And I think by that, then they'll kind of get a sense of how they can get involved in this Polyfantastica. But no matter what, Polyfantastica is broken into 400 pieces. So even if they found one of 400 and they wanted to make a book out of it, awesome. But just make sure they listen to all the other 399 books being made at the same time.
Could it be also a puzzle, perhaps? I mean, think about it as maybe 400 books, or 40 books, but could it also be putting together a puzzle? And I do have, before you answer that, I have one more question. I really want to push up against this notion of peace, because you and I, as activists in our community, we hope for those things. We hope for justice. We hope for reconciliation. But, as artists, we also need the dark to butt up against the light in this work that you have up for us to see.
Absolutely.
If there was no light, or there was no shadow to the lightness, you wouldn't see it. So it's profound for us as artists, because you need both.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I'm going to ask, do we then need that in our societies?
Right.
Do we need pain and sorrow? Do we?
What happens when we don't have any more problems? That's the funniest and most wonderful question. I mean, that's exactly it, Meliane. Like, we have to get ready for peace, because peace is a whole nother way of thinking about conflict. I had done some early creative writing classes, and I remember my teacher saying, "This is great, but where's the conflict?" I'm like, why are we always looking for conflict? And I mean, basically everything I would write would turn into just documentaries. But I'm okay with documentaries all the time. But it is an interesting thing that all storytellers have to think about, is why is there conflict, and what is the nature of conflict? So I think what happens in the far future, the way that peace is sustained, is that it's kind of like the golden rule and the platinum rule. The golden rule is do unto others what you would want done unto you. The platinum rule is do unto others as they would want done unto them. So everybody's got their own version of peace. Everybody has their own. And if I impose my version of peace on somebody else, that's not peace anymore. So every place on land has its own way to be loved, which shows love. Everybody's culture, everybody's songs are specific directions for how best to love and be loved by a place. So peace are these a whole network of cells, and each cell is happy. If you ask a cell, are they individuals or are they a collective? And they would say both. So that's the tricky. So working on that, the human conundrum. If we can solve us, we can solve everything. And that's why Polyfantastica is a chance of solving the distances is not the problem. It's human beings traveling from one star to the next physically. I mean, that can be solved. Human beings being nice to each other all along the way, that's the technology. Technology number one is compassion, and that's going to be consistent probably for the next 40,000 years.
Only for the next 40. I love it. Hey, Roger, do you have any final thoughts? Because we've been riffing here and having a great time. So
Eden Lee had a great question. Does Solomon dream in these images?
Yes.
That's a great question.
I fall asleep like this. I have no problem sleeping. I knock out. I literally just like that. I turn out and I'll wake up. I have no visual dreams at all. And I haven't had a visual dream. Maybe the last 5 years, I had 2 dreams that I can actually remember. And that's about it.
Aren't these waking dreams, young man? Aren't these waking dreams? I think that this is what these are for us. They are prodigious, extraordinary opportunities to see the inner workings and machinations of a genius, actually. Seriously, I find that, words are hard to describe all of this. And I have to keep returning to it because the story is so large. But when you kind of reduce it to compassion, I think perhaps that is the most difficult. And I think, Roger, in terms of this book and music festival and everything that you've done for the community, I just want to take a moment to thank you, because this is very precious time that we have together. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, I wanted to thank both of you. This was an extraordinary, if you call it a show. I think next time we'll have to get Solomon an entire day.
Yes, and ecologists, and then futurists and economists, so that we can just sort of broach these multiple subjects and see how this artist works in action. It would be great to see him paint. That would blow your mind and give you an opportunity to go, oh my God, I thought he was exceptional before, but now it's like, oh my God.
Awesome.
I just because of my métier, I think about books a lot, and think, well, how could you put this into a book, or books, or whatever? But there has to be some medium to get this out, and maybe what you're doing right now is the medium.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, just this image that you have up right now, if you look at it in real detail, you could spend half an hour.
Oh, wonderful.
By the way, I have one last question, and then we have to finish. How long does it take you to do one of these?
Oh, great question. Yeah, each one of these images will take me approximately uninterrupted 6 hours.
That to me is incredible. I think somebody should film you doing one in 6 hours.
Yeah. I have some time lapses on my Instagram, and here I'm just gonna really plug my Instagram account, because I do something fresh every day, and at least once a month I do something that's Polyfantastic. And if not,
what's his instrument? What's his instrument? Is it pencil?
No, is this drawing a pencil drawing?
Yeah. Pencil.
Yes. And how many pencils did it take?
Oh, it's one big mechanical pencil you can buy from a local office supply shop, and Bristol board paper. Basically, I learned to draw with whatever I have around, so that I can always be drawing. So like a ballpoint pen is amazing. You can do entire great works of art with a ballpoint pen. So by that way, I have no excuse not to be arting.
Well, we have to finish here, but anyway, thank you very much again for an amazing hour.
Oh, thank you all, and thank you all for this opportunity to share a story, and I really hope it cultivates a lot more stories. We need lots of them.
This has to be a regular item at the festival.
Oh,
Yeah,
wonderful.
so.
Sure. Yay!
What's Solomon up to this year? No, seriously. And Roger, may I just add finally to that, the brilliance of somebody is not only in his work, but in his character and the values. And as an artist too, this guy is not just an illustrator, but his fine art. I mean, there's such a range of with you, Saul, that I so appreciate and respect. People have a hard time understanding you can be so much more than one kind of an artist. So, he is all of those things to us in our community, and we do thank you, Saul. We thank you every day.
Oh,
and Roger, thank you for this opportunity.
Bless you. Thank you. Eliana, Roger. Thank you.
Aloha. Bye-bye.
Aloha.